When I learned that takeout was costing me almost $500 every single month, I knew that I had to be able to get rid of this habit if I wanted to quit my job and start my own business like I had been dreaming about. But this change didn't happen overnight. So here are the 4 shifts that helped me cut down my takeout spending and stay consistent with cooking at home for over a year. When I quit my job last year, I was giving up a steady paycheck, so I wanted to cut back on as many expenses as possible because I knew I was going to be living off of savings for a while. Now, you might be in a completely different position. Maybe you want to eat a little cleaner, or maybe you're preparing for a big change in your life and you just need to cut back on your expenses. Whatever the case may be, you have to make sure that your why is strong enough to carry you through some of those challenging times that you're inevitably going to experience with this new change that you're making in your life. And this leads me to the next step, which was surprisingly one of the hardest steps, and that is to track your current behavior without making any drastic changes. So I started tracking every single dollar that I was spending. The reason this was so hard was that I now had to face the reality of what I was doing every single day with my money. And I know this sounds intimidating, and I felt the same way at first. But this is where my goal of eventually wanting to quit my job really helped out. And after looking at a lot of financial advice online, I learned that if I wanted to actually change my spending behavior, I needed to understand it in a practical and objective way first. But this is also where I noticed something that wasn't quite working. So I started to feel pretty discouraged after that first month when I saw that I was pretty consistent with my habits for the first half of the month, but then the second half of the month, I had gone out to eat almost every single night. And things got even worse the following months, so at a certain point I decided that I was not going to be able to keep up with both tracking my spending and cutting it down at the same time. So I decided to just freely track my spending, remove any sort of limits on how much I was allowed to spend, and after tracking this spending for about 4 months, I had a pretty good idea of what I spent on average over the course of a month. And if I had not tracked my behavior, I would have never known the extent to which I was spending my money and essentially wasting my money, nor would I have had the motivation to cut this habit out of my life. Now, after you've been tracking your spending habits for a few months, you'll probably start to have the urge to actually make a change in your lifestyle. And this is where you want to be extra careful. Because I believed that once I had all this information, I was now going to make this huge change in my life pretty much overnight. And that simply was not the case. It still took me about a month or two to fully adjust to cooking every single meal at home. This is where this next mindset shift was extremely important, which is to focus on one change at a time. Even though I was hoping to save money, for the first few months my grocery spending was actually higher as I was trying to stock up on spices and other pantry ingredients. And throughout those entire first few months, I realized I was constantly facing a lot of guilt. The first layer of guilt was around the fact that I couldn't even cook for myself, and I saw people on social media cooking for their entire families and meal prepping every single week. And despite my own attempts to meal prep, what I found was that I just could not get myself to stick with the habit and actually even eat the food that I was making. That led to a whole nother level of guilt around the food waste. That, coupled with all of the financial guilt, was all just a recipe for constant guilt and shame around this behavior. That is when I realized that I needed something to change if I was ever going to get out of this trap or even begin to change my behavior. Because I noticed that whenever I would try to guilt myself out of this habit, things would actually get worse, and I would actually go right back to my habit of ordering takeout just to numb those uncomfortable feelings. But on a random night, as I was eating my food, I asked myself one simple question. Is there any way that I can make food that tastes exactly like this, but at home? And that right there was the beginning of a massive transformation. And I don't mean to sound cliche, but truly asking myself that question changed everything for me, because it made me realize that I was associating home cooking with these overly healthy meals that actually weren't even satiating me. And the biggest reason for that, which really should be no surprise, is that restaurant foods tend to be way more calorically dense than most of the food we make at home. So it made sense that when I tried to switch to eating at home completely, I was finding myself constantly hungry, constantly craving food, and just not feeling satiated. So instead of shaming myself for wanting takeout, I decided to turn those exact cravings into delicious homemade meals. And now you might be wondering, well, restaurant meals tend to be super elaborate and I don't have time to make all of that at home. But here's the key thing I realized. I wasn't even necessarily craving the exact restaurant food. I was just craving that indulgence. In fact, one of the first meals that I ever made at home was just a simple quesadilla with guacamole. And the beauty of this meal was that it was easy, it was simple, and the best part was that making it at home meant that I could literally have as much guacamole as I wanted. And so I actually enjoyed that entire experience and that feeling of freedom even more. So my biggest takeaway here is start with easy foods that you know you like, things you really can't go wrong with. For me, in the beginning, that looked like a lot of quesadillas, maybe pizza, tacos, things like that. But inevitably, the homemade version is going to be at least a little bit healthier than the restaurant. Granted, you're not deep frying or using a crazy amount of oil or sauces, but for the most part, homemade food is significantly healthier than restaurant food. And once I made that meal at home and enjoyed the entire experience of eating it and realized that this was actually homemade food, that unlocked an entirely new way of thinking and pretty much a new lifestyle for me. So all in all, it took me about 6 months to fully let go of my habit of excessively dining out, and now I'm at a point where I cook almost 99% of my meals at home. And these days I'm only going out to eat maybe once a month, and I've been consistent with that habit for about a year now. And the best part about this whole process has just been the trust that I've built within myself. And I'm someone who has always loved cooking, and my passion for it has only grown. So I've been making videos on my channel for a few months now about how I've cut this habit of ordering takeout and instead switched to a more home cooking lifestyle, which still includes delicious meals. So feel free to check out some of my other videos for more inspiration. And I really hope you found this video helpful, and if you have any questions or anything I may have missed, please feel free to leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.